A few days ago, I had a conversation with someone who rarely listens to the podcast episodes, but she's more of an avid reader of stuff that I put up on Instagram. Now, for those of you who've been hanging out over here on the podcast for a while, you'll remember that I also talk about similar things, business and sales and personal selling related, on the Sales Conversations Instagram handle, and that is at sales_conversations on Instagram. Now, the reason why I use that name, sales_conversations, is because if you've been here on the podcast for a while, I'm sure you'd have picked up that for me, the art of selling is primarily a conversation. Whether we're having that conversation one-to-one, over the phone, face-to-face, or email. But even if you want to look at things from a branding perspective or mass marketing campaign perspective, I really think that having a conversation mindset is the best way to go about it, because then you're trying to be engaging, you're trying to seek feedback, and then you can use feedback to make the rest of your communications or your campaign much more effective. And so that's why I picked the name at sales_conversations on the Instagram handle. And that's how it's been for the last 1 year. Maybe I might change the name of the handle. Maybe I might not. Let's just see as it goes. So anyway, she's more of a follower on the Instagram handle, and so she reached out. Let's call her Flo. That's not her real name. It's close to her real name anyway, but let's just call her Flo for now, because I'm not sure if I have permission to start. I'm sure there's no problem with me discussing the ideas that we ran through over here on the podcast, but I haven't gotten her permission to start using her real name. So Flo reached out, and she thinks that there's room for collaboration with what we do, because she also puts content out. She has a blog. She's mostly a fiction writer. She's one of these eclectic writing types. I think she should narrow down her focus, but that's a conversation that we're going to get to eventually as we build up a working relationship. So for now, we have been discussing possible ideas about how we can collaborate for the future. Since her website is, like I said, her website is kind of eclectic. So there's some fiction writing there, there's some real estate writing there, there's some automotive writing, and so she also wants business focused writing there that has to do with the sorts of things that I talk about. And so one of the possible ideas that we looked at was for me to answer FAQs, frequently asked questions, and those questions would be based on things she would like to know as a business owner, and then apart from that, questions that she gets from people within her own ecosystem. Because even though she's an eclectic writer and her academic background is in law, occupationally she's doing lots of conveyancing agreements and stuff, real estate people, but you could say her heart is in the tech space. Yes, I know it's beginning to sound unwieldy, which is the reason why I think she ought to narrow down eventually, but that's going to be a conversation between me and Flo for the future. So she thinks that there's room for us to do projects together, and sure, I have no problem with that. And so let's keep our eyes, or rather our ears, open over here on the podcast for these are some of the more interesting things that are going to be coming down the pike. So remember that questions that come from her or people in her own ecosystem, her IT people or her real estate people, are going to be, stuff like, I have a problem with this, or how do you do this, how do you do that? And I'm going to create content for her site. I'll also share that on the Instagram handle. And I'm also going to talk about those things that might be relevant to you guys here, my loyal audience over here on the podcast. But one thing that I'd like to point out before we get to that, remember, I've said this in a couple of episodes past, maybe 3 or 4, where I did one of those how-to recordings. So remember that for sales, this is one of these things that is very contextual So it's very rare that you have one answer that fits all situations. I believe the analogy that I used at my last recording, where I addressed these sorts of issues, was that of a physician. Because a physician, just like us, is also a service-based professional. Now, you don't just show up to a physician and say, "Hey, doctor, I have a headache," and then he says, "Take Panadol." And it's not always going to be the case that take Panadol is going to be the solution to the problem. So it's going to depend upon a number of factors. You might show up and it's just a little bit of fatigue because you've had a tough day at work. Then yes, the answer might be take Panadol, go to sleep. It may have been going on for a while, and maybe you've been having stress at work, and then the answer is going to be take Actifed to knock you out, and then go to sleep. It's just a little bit of anxiety. But then there are other circumstances where you're having a headache, and the solution might be come in quick, your blood pressure is out of whack, we need to increase your medication. And then there are other situations where a headache means come in, we need to operate on you immediately because you have is it thrombosis? That's where a vein is swelling up at close to your skull or something. So come in, let's operate because you have thrombosis. Sorry, for those of you who are medical people, forgive me if I'm what's the word? Forgive me if I'm coming up with scenarios that are out of whack. I'm just a layman, so I'm just coming up with stuff. So the bottom line, what I'm just trying to say is that it's not every single time that you say I have a headache that the solution is take Panadol. Sometimes it will be take Panadol, sometimes it will be go and sleep, sometimes it will be take Actifed, sometimes it will be let us up your hypertensive medication, and other times it will be come in quick, you need to go to surgery right now, because it is extremely contextual. And the reason why the physician can make this sort of determination is because the physician knows a lot about the pulmonary system, the cardiovascular system, the lymphatic system, what else? The muscular system, all the different systems that comprise the body. And so he knows what kinds of questions, he or she knows what kinds of questions to ask and what to look for, and because of that, to know what to prescribe. So when we start going on those episodes of questions with Flo, just bear that in mind, that the questions are highly contextual. I will try to emphasize that again, but do not assume that whatever scenarios that we deal with are going to be the ultimate definitive way of addressing those sorts of issues. It's all going to depend on circumstances and the wider context, and that's the reason why I make the podcast, to try and introduce you guys to the wider context that goes on when it comes to the art of sales, personal selling, and this whole thing of persuasion, because there's a wider context that is involved, a philosophy about who the human person is, what kinds of needs human beings have, how we go about fulfilling them, what else? What is the buying process? How do you come across as being credible? There's a whole lot of philosophical and systemic stuff that goes behind this whole thing of selling. So that's one of the ideas behind the podcast, to expose you guys to these sorts of things so that you are going to be able to make the determination for yourself when you are faced with problems of what should I do, how to do this, and how not to do that. But be that as it may, the FAQs with Flo are going to be informative and instrumental anyway, because you're now going to see concrete ways in which all the theory that we talk about here are applied. So that's it pretty much. This recording is just to let you guys know about some of the projects that we have coming up in 2022. So keep an ear out over here for FAQs with Flo. I'm not sure what we're going to call the segment. We're still trying to work out the fine details. So those are going to be some of the projects to look forward to in 2022, and I hope that they're going to be an interesting and informative learning experience for us both, for you guys, the listener, and then also for me as the podcast host, as I have to take the knowledge that I've garnered so far from my experience about selling and to see how they can apply to all the wonderful scenarios that we're going to come up with. So whether Flo is submitting questions as a lawyer or a writer, or whether her audience are submitting questions as IT people or whatever it is that they are involved in. Now, do not be afraid if you are a wedding and event professional. This is not going to take you away from your core business, because remember, we can't run away from having a multidisciplinary approach, especially since the principles of selling are universal. So the concrete applications will depend according to what industry you are, whether real estate or tech or events or selling shoes on Instagram. But the principles are universal, and you will always find applications. Because remember, one of my favorite sales podcasts that I like listening to actually is a sales podcast for plumbers, because the fellow has this interesting idea about service over, what he calls it. Is this service over sales or something like that? I can't remember. But it's something that I guess people in that industry need. He's an American, so he's talking to an American audience, because I guess the plumbing people just focus a lot more on sales, getting in, get the job done, and then get out. And he's trying to show how we need to raise the level of the game and introduce a serious service element to it. And so I get to learn a lot from there, and stuff that you can use to apply to those of us in the wedding and the event space. So don't worry that we're beginning to hang out with other people, other disciplines over here on the podcast. It's not prostitution. There's a lot that we can learn from other disciplines as well. So thank you very much for listening to the Sales for the Nigerian Wedding Industry podcast. I'm your host, Abuja-based sales consultant and media event professional, Tabashima Ayede. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'll catch you guys at the next recording.